This is Madro John Madden in El Diamante, Mexico, in the municipality of Vega de Alator, in the state of Veracruz, central Mexico along the Gulf Coast. Veracruz is right in the neck, right before the Yucatan Peninsula starts to shoot out into the Gulf of Mexico. And my eventual destination, there's somebody walking back there. I've never seen anybody walking back there. I wonder if there's actually mostly this field looks not very easily walkable. That guy's making good progress. There must be some kind of a path back there. And I've been here 3.5 weeks and I've not discovered it. It took me a while to get the courage to ask permission to come back behind the hotel. That red building's the hotel. In front of it is the restaurant. I broke down a mile or two north of here on the 15th of June. Got towed into a mechanic's shop, which is kind of straight across that hedgerow there. And it's taken a while because I didn't have all the money to get the job even started. His first step is to send a part out to another shop, and he needed money to do that. But over the course of 3.5 weeks, we've gotten really tight. I got to get out of the habit of saying we, because I do not have a dog companion anymore, and I do not want to get people confused about do I have a partner, because I'm kind of wanting to be available for some of that action right now. And I'm realizing that always saying we always left people thinking I had a partner. And I'm realizing that in some ways I did, because my dogs have been so primary to me. But the restaurant and hotel are run by an extended family of 3 nuclear families. And they are among the most wonderful people I've ever met. So happy and funny and sweet, and none of them speaks much English. But with the Google Translator app, we do communicate more and more and more. And they really genuinely care about me. And I love them. Right down to the 3-year-old, who's been actually quite special to me. And there's chickens and dogs that hang out around the place. And a cat that really belongs in the house. And 3 dogs that get tied up out here during the day because they each have history of biting people, and they haven't had them destroyed. I think they must come in the house at night, and they are no danger with the family, but with other people they are. And it's been for me a combination here of deep peace after a fairly chaotic first 3 months in Mexico. This last month has been a lot of peace, a lot of grounding. I get to use the good Wi-Fi they have based on the hotel to load my videos to TikTok and YouTube. It's been great for that. And it's been a very creative time for me. I've been writing and videographing a lot. And continuing to go through lots more personal changes on my own. I want to make a videotape about one of my favorite crazy homeless people. Homeless, what's the whole title? Crackhead, crazy, hooker, homeless women I have known and loved. I have a history of being really engaged with homeless people, and I realize it goes back to Chicago, where when I got out of one of my hospitalizations, because I had been wrongfully diagnosed as bipolar and spent 30 years trying to learn how to act the part and on terrible drugs. But after one of my hospitalizations, I got a gig, because of my background is psychology, to do counseling with homeless women at a wonderful shelter on the south side that would hold, I think, about 7 women at a time for as long as a year, and I think sometimes even longer. and they got lots of services and help to get their lives to get together. And I was offering counseling every Saturday morning at a pretty good rate, actually, which was really helpful. And my therapist at the time got me the gig because she was friends with the woman who ran the shelter. And my psychologist counselor really was wanting to get me out of management consulting and back into being a therapist again. So it was great. I really loved doing it, but it was only recently that I went, sure, long before I got involved in the homeless community in Nashville, or taking homeless people in off the street into my apartment, there was that. The House of Hope. I think it was the House of Hope is what Sally called that place. I did good work with some of those women, really helped them. And it was wonderful for me. In Asheville, I lived a lot of different places. I lived in the country and I lived in town. And my last place that I lived in Asheville was a subsidized senior apartment building that was quite a grand building. It had literally been a grand hotel, Battery Park Hotel, one of the great hotels of the Southeast there. And it had been run down at one point, and HUD bought it up and turned it into really quite nice apartments for seniors and very in demand. The word was it would take 3 years to get in. I actually was on the waiting list for a year. And when my name came up, I was not crazy about moving downtown, but some friends of mine really pushed me to do it. It's cheap, relatively, and safe, and nice, clean, well-maintained. Right downtown, which Asheville downtown is extraordinarily charming, but downtown didn't agree with me. I have come to realize more and more over time that I'm a country guy, big time, and thrive on being out in the mountains, but didn't fully know that yet, even though I had at one point lived out in the mountains for a number of months. But I was so sick from the drugs and from being told I was mentally ill that I didn't enjoy it as much as I learned later how to enjoy being out in the mountains. And in that building, I didn't want to live with seniors. Oh, I really resisted that. And the woman in the building that I most resisted, she seemed to me the icon for what was wrong about that place, was a woman who quite overweight, wore only overalls, and sat out in front of the building chain smoking all day. But through a chain of events, life said, get to know her. You need to know her. So I went back to smoking, which I had been struggling against for years, but it was the way to bond with her, and it really worked for us. And I would spend a lot of time out in front of the building and discovered that lots of people wanted to spend time with Diana because she actually is an extraordinary person. And we became such good friends that at one point I wrote a 15-minute story about our friendship called Soul Friends that I performed for 75 people at an evening of storytelling, and it rocked that house. And actually, most of my poetry and writing comes very impromptu, very almost channeled. I get taken over by something bigger than me, and I, for a long time, said it's the most spiritual experience I have. That one I polished. That one I worked on over a couple of weeks and really perfected it. And it's quite strong, and it's a beautiful story about our friendship and about her. So I got to know Diana, who had been homeless an awful lot of her life, most of her life, and had a very painful, traumatic history at the hands of the psychiatrist. She grew up in Mexico. Soon I will be headed for Mexico City, which was home for her. And as a teenager in Mexico, she went into an ecstatic state and was dancing in the rain and got thrown in the back of a cop car and shot up with something. And when she came to, she was in a psychiatry lecture hall as a specimen that they were going to interview. And never recovered from that, was still regarding herself as a psychiatric patient. It's only in the last couple of years that she seems in the middle of tremendous physical problems. Her body is really going south on her. She's in her early 60s. That she's gotten happy. She's gotten amazingly happy and peaceful. No longer any paranoia or anything like that. But I learned a lot about homelessness from talking with Diana, who had been homeless in Santa Monica, I want to say, and Mexico. And she spent her teen years in Chicago, on the north side of Chicago, my hometown. I knew pretty much exactly where she had lived. I don't know that we overlapped in Chicago at all. Yeah, learned a lot from Diana. And then there was two different guys that I brought in off the street to my apartment. The first was a guy I knew well from church, and we had been roommates at one point. I had rented a room in his lovely home. But when I discovered that he was living out of his car, I convinced him to come live with me. And he was with me for 2 months. And we developed an extraordinary friendship. He was the buddy I had always been missing in Asheville. And one very goofy kind of side effect of my drug-induced semi-coma was that I mostly did not explore the gorgeous areas around Asheville for 16 years. I mostly didn't do day trips, didn't do a lot of hiking. Complained about it, would say, I don't know. But I would say I'm waiting for a girlfriend to do it with, or someone special to share that experience with. And so John was that. He's a big hiker. And we did some wonderful hiking and some great talking, buddy to buddy. And he got, through a wonderful agency in Asheville, he pretty quickly got a good deal on an apartment and got moved in, and progressively has built a nice life for himself ever since. And then maybe a year later, I was in that building 3 years, I think. I was walking down the street in Asheville, and I call it the busker capital of America. Even New Orleans doesn't have a busker scene like Asheville does. Wonderful musicians who gravitate towards that town. And I heard a guy, I think I was a block and a half or 2 blocks away, and the sound of this blues guitar and this guy's haunting voice, I said, "Who is this?" And it was Eric Freeman, the Carolina blues boy from South Carolina, where he grew up in the hill country, mountains. He they were selling gas. The guys who drive around selling you gas for your heating and cooking. I guess not heating so much as cooking and stuff. They broadcast some wonderful sounds. I encountered him and called him back a month later to see if he would do a flash mob. I wanted him playing his guitar to host a flash mob that we were doing for a cause I was supporting. And he did that, and over the course of that morning confided to me that he was recently homeless. He had arrived in Asheville homeless, but had gotten into an apartment and got thrown out of there because he wasn't on the lease. The person who was subletting in a public housing place was not supposed to have done that. Eric got peremptorily thrown out and spent the night in a parking garage. And I called my friend Tom and said, he's older than I thought. I had him being in his 30s. He's 49. Tougher than I thought. He really has been on the street a lot in his life. But I think he's got a really good heart. I've got a good feeling about this. I just want to run it by somebody. Am I crazy to offer to him to come stay with me? But I did. And it was a wonderful, brilliant thing to do. He is an extraordinary guy. And we also developed a really great friendship. Black man from the streets, older, white man. There was an age difference that was very similar to my son, and there was some father-son chemistry, but an awful lot of buddy chemistry. And he pulled for my wild side, which I have always had, but it really came to the fore with Eric, and we had a blast. And he influenced me in so many wonderful ways, including introducing me to the homeless community. And the woman that I'm finally going to get around to talking about, Rebecca, Eric had a history of taking homeless people in off the streets, and he did it there. He brought a string of homeless meth head hookers home, not for sex, but just to get them out of the cold. And he also knew that I had not had sex for quite a long time, and he wanted to get me laid. And he sent, I think, 3 different women at different times. He paid them to go in and give me a blowjob in my bedroom, and that never worked. I even tried once, but it was so unromantic I couldn't bear it. And finally, when this 3rd woman showed up, shoved through the door, she was sweet and obviously very cracked. And I said, could we just not try sex and just sit on the bed and talk for a while? And we had a gorgeous maybe hour of sitting on the bed, looking out the 5th floor window at downtown Asheville and making up stories about what we were seeing out there. And she was pretty cracked, but I learned to get into her world, and it was a lovely time. So when the COVID hit Asheville, I left Asheville, abandoned my apartment, and got a camper van and spent a full year running around the mountains there, which making up for lost time, what I had never done, and really falling in love with the Blue Ridge Mountains and getting so happy. And I had had a big spiritual experience, and I was in a wonderful place. But I would go back to Asheville, because that's where my friends were, and there were services I could look into there. And living on a Social Security check, I was poor at the end of every month, and technically homeless from living in a camper van. And as of now, after 3 years on the road, I reckon it's been something like 11 nights that my car has been impounded or in some way not available to me, where I've been actually really on the street. But in Asheville, when I would go back in there, Eric was living on the street again and really knew homeless services and helped me tap into free meals and other services in town. And at one of the gatherings for a meal, I met a woman who was so sharp and lovely, a very attractive woman, 30-ish, maybe 35, really stunning body, and really cool. It made me wonder, like, I've been fascinated with what's the story. Every homeless person has a story, how they got there, what happened to her. And so we got to be friends, and in one conversation I was telling her, for some reason, about that experience where Eric had sent a woman in to give me a blowjob, and we ended up sitting on the bed and making up stories about what we saw out the window. And I don't think I had said she was so cracked, because Rebecca says to me, well, that was me. That was me that night. Yeah, I'm the one. Which really blew me out. Like, well, why was she so cracked then? Well, crack is the operative term, why she was so cracked then. And so together when I was talking to her in the present moment. So we got to be really good friends. And I got to see how when she's using crack, she's a crazy person. Dissolved. Oh my God. I even, one day I was sitting on a curb on a church stairs just a half a block away from a homeless breakfast that I had just gone to. And I made a videotape where I was saying into the tape, now this woman down the street here, so cracked, and boy is she fucked up today. And then she walked down the street to talk to me, and I just left the audio. I put the camera down did not turn it off, and so you have an audio recording of us talking. And I've used it with another psychologist, actually my old therapist, as an example of how I've learned to talk to crazy people. You grab onto what makes some sense and just ignore what's super crazy. And little by little, they entrain to you, and you entrain to them, and you start having a real conversation. And that's what I had with her. Other things about her, she had always been in Asheville, and she would, homeless people and users will make up lots of stories, but most of her stories would check out, that she actually had known the person who ran that store, or her mother had known them, and here's something she knew about the history of that store. Like everything. She had an extraordinary gift around music. Just a few bars into a song she had never heard before, she's singing along. She could pick it up, boom, like that. A thing I've learned is that tobacco really grounds me. It's really good for me. And lots of people with psychiatric conditions need their tobacco. And one day she took 3 drags out of a cigarette and threw it out the door of the van and said, I got what I needed out of that. And I've learned that too. There's usually 2 to 3 drags gives me what I need, and the rest is a little redundant usually. I had been gone from Asheville for most of the winter of 21. When I got back in the spring, I saw her at a homeless event, and she had lost like 20 pounds, and she looked so frail. I said, did you ever get indoors last winter? Because the winters kill homeless people in Asheville. So it'll drop way below freezing sometimes. And all those people living in tents behind the Ingles supermarkets back in the woods, I learned to realize that they were in there behind all the city Ingles supermarkets back in the woods. No, she had never gotten indoors. So she haunts me. Usually homeless people don't like to be photographed. Before I was leaving Asheville, kind of for good, to go off on my travels further into the country, I asked her if I could take a photo, and she proudly allowed me to, and I prized that photo. Yeah, I love her. I pretty much never had a phone in the time I knew her. I have no way to contact her, but I sure wish her well. Good person doing her best. Okay.